everyone, in this video we're going to solve the exercises from 8 to 13 of the chapter 8 application, the costs of taxation. This is a book of principles of economics of Gregory Monk. So the number 8 problem says the government places a tax on the purchase of socks. A. Illustrate the effect of this tax on equilibrium price and quantity in the sock market. Identify the following areas, both before and after the imposition of the tax: total spending by consumers, total revenue for producers, and government tax revenue. So here we have the normal market without any intervention. So we have here P1 and Q1. In this axis we have quantities and the y-axis we have prices. So this is the normal equilibrium, the free market equilibrium, P1 and Q1. So suppose there is a tax. So in this time we will have new prices. What's that? We have this P2, which is the price that the consumer they have to pay for one pair of socks, okay? But instead producers they will just perceive P3 because the difference P2 minus P3 is the tax, okay? So here, before, what was the total spending of consumers? It was P1 times Q1. It was the total spending from consumer side. And naturally, it was the same. It was the total revenue for producers. Okay? So this was before. And the government tax revenue was 0 because they weren't, or the government wasn't in the free market equilibrium. So here we know that with this tax the quantities in the market they will decrease. So after the tax we know that the total spending consumers it will turn down to P2, which is the time that they have to pay now, times the quantities that they are going to demand after the tax, which is going to be Q2. So this is going to be the new spending of consumers. What about the total revenue for producers now? It's going to be P3 because from the producer side, unfortunately, they won't receive P2. They will receive P3 because part of this P2 is for paying to the government. So producers they will receive P3. So the total revenue will be P3 times Q2. And what about consumer government tax revenue? So they will receive T, which is the tax, the size of the tax, which is the same P2 minus P3 times the quantities that there's going to be in the market. So this is going to be Q2. So B part says, does the price received by producers rise or fall? Can you tell whether total receipts for producers rise or fall? Explain. So here we have again our case in our free market, and here we have now with the taxes. So with the tax now we figure out how the P3 is lower than P1. Okay, so we know that the Q2 is lower as well from Q1. So here this is all to say that producers they will receive now P3 times Q2, which is going to be much less than P1 Q1. So the price will decrease and the total revenue for producers is going to decrease as well. C. As the price paid by consumers rise or fall, can you tell whether total spending by consumers rises or fall? Explain carefully. So there is a hint. Think about elasticity. If total consumer spending falls, does consumer surplus rise? Explain. So here we have our case. Okay, this is the this is the case that we have until now. And what we know is that P2 is larger than P1. Okay, but we know that at the same time Q2 is lower than Q1. So what does it mean? It means that we have to compare these two areas. The first area, this like beige area, is going to be P1 times Q1, which was the case of the equilibrium with the free market case. After the tax, we have P2 Q2. So we have to compare these both areas, which is larger. So it will depend on elasticity. We know the elasticity definition, which is the percentage change of quantities over the percentage change in the price. When the quantities vary more than the price, it means that it's elastic. So it means that there is an increase in the price and the change in the quantities is going to be even bigger because consumers they have an elasticity larger than 1. Okay, so in this case this square is going to be this case this square is going to be lower than the previous case. But when we have elasticity of demand with this smaller than 1, it means even the percentage change in this price, the quantities they are not going to vary as the same variation of the price. So it means that the total spending it will increase because people face an inelastic demand. So there's going to be more spending. Okay, so 9. Suppose the government currently raises $100 million through a $0.01 tax on widgets and another 100 million through a $0.01 tax on gadgets. If the government doubled the tax rate on widgets and eliminated the tax on gadgets, would it raise more money than today, less money, or the same amount of money? Explain. So here we have to remember this relation between the tax size and the tax revenue. So remember that now there's going to be not more tax on gadgets. So all the taxes that are going to be just on widgets. So we are going to analyze the widget situation. So here we have the first case. When this change, it will return less money. Why? Because imagine that we were before in this point. We were in the point of maximum tax revenue given 0.01. So if there is a doubled on taxes, we will lay over here. So there's going to be larger tax, but the total revenue will be less. So we have the second case where given the policy when there's not going to be taxation on gadgets, they will receive the same. So it could be the case of the 0.1, okay, 0.1, and afterwards with the 0.1 increasing, there's going to be 0.2. So at this time, if you see they're actually the same, and they will receive exactly the same. So what about the other case, which is doubled money? So this is going to be more money if they were here in 0.01, and with the doubled of the tax, they will arrive to this case 0.02, which is the maximum tax revenue given the tax size. 10. Most states tax purchase of new cars. Suppose that New Jersey currently requires car dealers to pay the state $100 for each car sold, and plans to increase the tax $150 per car next year. A. Illustrate the effect of this tax increase on the quantity of cars sold in New Jersey, the price paid by consumers, and the price received by producers. So here we have the market of cars. Here we have the initial situation where prices are equal to quantities and demanded and supplied as well. So here we have the first case. There is a tax in the market, okay? So the size of the tax, it was the first one. It was 100. So this is the first case. Now with the plan of increasing the tax, we will be in the 150 case over here. So we see here how the prices, they're going to be P5 and P4. Remember, P2 was the price paid by consumers with the tax, and P3 was the money received by producers with a tax of 100. When the situation changed, we see here how the consumers, they have to pay no more P2, but they have to pay P5, and at the same time producers, they will receive just P4. Okay, so here we have the B question. Create a table that shows the level of consumer surplus, producer surplus, government revenue, and total surplus both before and after the tax increase. So here we have our case, the initial one. Now there is the increased, okay, of the taxes. So we are going to divide, or we are going to split all the areas in order to understand a little bit what's going on with this market. So here we have all the sections, split. So first, when there was initial tax, the consumer surplus was A, B, C, because remember they have to pay P2, so the consumer surplus will be ABC. Remember, this area takes into account all the consumers, kind of potential consumers between quotation marks, that they are willing to pay even this price for this good, but instead of paying this part they have to pay P2. So this is kind of saving from the consumer side. The producer surplus, they will receive KJL. Remember that this producer surplus is basically what is kind of the benefit from the producer side, because remember that along this part of the curve there are several producers that are willing to offer their products even to a price lower than P3, but they don't have to offer the good at this price, because they can offer the cars at P3. So this kind of benefits. So this is the producer surplus. The tax revenue is basically the size of the tax, which is this one, okay, times the quantities that are traded in the market. So they are Q2. So they're going to be this area, which is the same D, E, G, and H. So what is the total surplus? So it's basically all the same of this one. This is the total surplus. And let's take into account that we have here Fi, the deadweight loss. Okay, all the transactions that they are not going to be made anymore because of the taxation, okay, which is F and I. Now we are going to see what happens when there is an increase in the tax from $100 to $150. So now with the new tax, the consumer surplus is going to be just A because they have to pay P5 for the car. On the other side, we have the producers. They have just L as producer surplus because instead of offering the cars a price of P3, they will produce and offer the cars a P4. Okay, so it's going to be just L. What is now the tax revenue? So the tax revenue is going to be DG. How come? Because it's going to be this, which is the T, which is P2 minus P3, times the quantities that they are now traded. So now in the market, since the tax, there's going to be Q3 instead of Q2. So now the total revenue from the government is going to be here DG and BJ. So here I missed BJ as well. BJ here. BJ. Okay. So now the total surplus is going to be A, B, which I didn't put it. A, B, D, G, J, L. Okay. Still you need to put here B and J. Okay. Now what is the change? From the consumer side, they will lose B and C because there's going to be more perceived from the consumer side. The producers, they will not receive any more J and K as producer surplus. And the tax revenue, they won't receive A and H, but instead they will receive B and J. Okay, here is minus E plus H, but it's going to be plus B plus J because they didn't have this before, but they have now this one, so it's BJ. And now the change is going to be which one? So the change is going to be that they will lose C, E, H, K. Okay, here you have to meet B and J because it's now part of the government. So here you have to meet B and J, and the correct answer will be C, E, H, K. Okay, so C. What is the change in the government revenue? Is it positive or negative? What is the change in deadweight loss? Is it positive or negative? So here we have again the case. We are going to be kind of fast here. So here we have again the case. So here the first question says the government revenue. So it's going to be positive or negative. So it will depend. Why? Because this is going to be negative because they will lose E and H because of the change of the tax. But in compensation of these loss, they will receive B and J. Okay, so it depends. And what is the change in deadweight loss? Is it positive or negative? Definitely it's going to be higher, it's going to be negative because in this case before with the first tax there was a deadweight loss of F and I. So you can think about positive in sort of way because it increases, right? So maybe it would be positive if you can explain in this way because it's going to be an increasing of C, E, H, K, which it wasn't before, but now due to the new tax, the deadweight is going to increase to this area. Okay, the next point says E. Give one reason why the demand for cars in New Jersey might be fairly elastic. Does this make the additional tax more or less likely to increase government revenue? How much states try to reduce the elasticity of demand? So remember about elasticity. When some good is really elastic, when you don't need this one strictly, or you have like several substitutes. So in this case, the government does in this case could be like more motorcycles or more public transportation with more quality. Okay, so it would be it depends that it less likely to increase revenue. Changing quantities is larger than in price. So remember, when there is an increase in taxes and the good it is elastic, the change in prices is lower compared with the variation of quantities. So just if the good is inelastic, there will be an increasing in the spending. Okay, so in other case you can put like less substitutes. So for example, how much states try to reduce the elasticity of demand? So then they can reduce the elasticity of demand if there are less substitute or less price of complementary goods. So for example, if the gasoline is cheaper, which is kind of complementary good, people are more incentived to buy cars because the complementary good as oil is going to be which is going to be cheaper. So several years ago the British government imposed a poll tax that required each person to pay a flat amount to the government independent of his or her income or wealth. What is the effect of such a tax on economic efficiency? What is the effect on economic equity? Do you think it was a popular tax? Okay, here we have the case. Here we have the free market, right? So now there's going to be the policy. Which is the policy? I'm going to take you out a flat quantity of money. So for example, I'm going to take you out 100 pounds. Okay, so imagine that the salary, your wage is 1,000 pounds. So I'm going to take you out 100 pounds. But what about if you earn 500 per month? It doesn't matter. I'm going to take you out the same 100 pounds. Okay, so in this case what we are doing, or what the government is doing, is strictly to take the acquisitive power or reduce the acquisitive power of the population, so the demand is going to decrease, it's going to move left. Okay, so now there's going to be these quantities and prices um, traded in the market. So what about efficiency? So we see here how it affects efficiency because it reduces the prices P2, but as well it reduces the quantities. Okay, so consumers, they cannot spend at the same time, so they will be better off, worse off, and on the other side the producers, they will receive less. So what is the first case? So in the first case we have P1 times Q1. It was the traded. But in the second case we have just P2 times Q2. What about equity? Everybody pays the same quantity. So what does it mean? It means basically that poor people, as a relation with the salary, they will be charged more than rich people, because it is not like comparable if you have like people which have a really high incomes and they will just pay 100 pounds, and when you compare with the poor people, they have to pay the same 100 pounds. It is considered as a regressive tax because more people with less resources or less money, they have to pay more as a percentage of the salary. So what is the result of that non-popular policy? If you want to see that, just YouTube poll tax and you will see your great protest against the police in England. So definitely is not a good idea. Okay. So 12. This chapter analyzed the welfare effects of a tax on a good. Consider now the opposite policy. Suppose that the government subsidizes a good. For each unit of the good sold, the government pays $2 to the buyer. How does the subsidy affect consumer surplus, producer surplus, tax revenue, and total surplus? Does a subsidy lead to a deadweight loss? Explain. So here we have the normal case, which is quantities and prices in a free market. Now with a subsidize to the consumer that the government will provide $2 for each good bite and natural result. So we can think about there's going to be a change or there's going to be a shift to the right or upward to the demand side. So I'm going to put in dotted line because it's not actually the case. It's just like the tax that we put like a reference point. Okay, so this is how like the demand is going to change. So now how we can analyze this one is so interesting because this size, okay, this size is going to be a subsidized $2. So it means that the consumer, they have to pay now P3 instead of P1. Okay, and in this case the the producers, they will receive P2, okay, instead of P1. So it is interesting because as the tax case, which is analogous, even the subsidize is given or is levied just to the consumers, the producers, they will be affected as well, because this case producers, they will receive P2 instead of P1, and consumers, they will pay P3 instead of P1. So here we are going to divide our sections in this one. So what was the consumer surplus without subsidy? Without subsidy, we have A plus C. Remember, it was the case P1, Q1, so the consumer surplus was AC. Remember that all people along this curve, they were willing to pay even more for they were willing to pay even more in order to have one quantity of the good, but instead of paying a price larger than P1, they will buy at the price of P1, so it's kind of saving. So it's AC. Which the producer surplus, they will have kind of a benefit because there are producers that they are willing to offer the products even to prices lower than P1, but instead of P1, instead of these prices, they can offer to P1. So the producer surplus is DE. What about the tax revenue? It doesn't appear here in the free market case because naturally we have like government, they don't have any like intervention to the free market. So we have at the end the total surplus is A plus C plus D plus E. Now with the subsidy. Now the subsidy, the consumers, they will pay just P3, okay? So they will buy Q2, okay? So this is going to be the new like price the consumer buy. So here we can analyze the consumer surplus as A plus C plus D plus F, okay? So what about the producer surplus? They will receive now P2 instead of P1 because of the subsidy of the government. So this is going to be P2 quantities Q2. So here we have this triangle is going to be the consumer surplus, which is denoted by the area C plus H plus D plus E. What about the government? Remember that with the taxes, the government they have positive because they have incomes. But with the in this case, it's not going to be tax revenue because they are subsidizing. So in this case, the subsidy is going to be negative. It's going to be considered as the spending from the government side. So it's going to be the quantities sold or the quantities traded in the market times the subsidy. So it's going to be Q2 times $2, which is going to be C, H, G, F, and G. So what is now the total surplus? The total surplus is going to be, you have to be like carefully sum. A is going to be here, C minus C, which is going to cancel out, but plus C is going to be still here. E, okay, is going to be E, is going to be still here. D, cancel with D, and still there is one D. And G, negative, you don't have G here, you don't have G neither, so we have G just in the tax expending or revenue, which is minus G. So here is the total surplus, which is negative. So the change, the consumer surplus is gonna be better. The consumers will be better with the subsidy, which is naturally a case of the subsidy, which they really want to be better from consumers and producers. So we have D plus F as an increases because this one it wasn't before without subsidy, and now with subsidy they have now this consumer surplus. The producer surplus, they will have now C and H. It wasn't before part of them. So this is going to be an increase for producer surplus. Which one is going to be affected? Obviously the government, because they were with zero, and now because of the intervention they have to pay C, A, G, F, and D. So this one is going to be the change. And what is the total surplus? The total surplus, if you sum here, you compare here with this one, there is one member that it wasn't before, which was G. Okay, so in this case, this one is considered a deadweight loss. So a subsidy as a tax, they lead to a deadweight loss. So 13. Suppose that a market is described by the following supply and demand equations. So here we have the supply curve, and here we have the demand curve. It's important to see here how the slope, which is denoted by P, is positive. Okay, so here we have positive. This is positive and this is negative because the demand is downward slope. Okay, so the first question is solve for the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So what is the condition of equilibrium? The condition of equilibrium is that the quantities demanded, this is not an A, this is a D, is exactly equal to the quantity supplied. So here I just operate equation 1 equals to equation 2. So here I can pass this one, which is subtracting here, I can put to the other side adding, and we have 3p equal 300. I can divide both sides by 3 and I have the price, equilibrium price, which is $100. I can get this 1.1 equation, which is the result, into 1. Okay, so instead of putting p, I'm going to plug 100. So the quantities of equilibrium is going to be 200. Now, the question says, suppose that tax of T is placed on buyers. So the new demand equation is. So here is interesting to see how the tax is now here, which makes the demand, the curve demand shift to the left, okay? Because we are like putting the taxes here. So the question is, solve for the new equilibrium, what happens to the price received by sellers, the price paid by buyers, and the quantity sold. So here we have the case. What is interesting that I'm just figuring out now. Here is the quantity, okay, so it's supposed to be the y-axis. But here usually we graph with the price, okay? So we have to take into account that this curve is going to change, okay? So in this case, for example, I put here the quantity demanded 300 minus P minus T, which naturally makes this down. But think a little bit. If this price, okay, when you think this price, which is negative, you put to the other side, it's going to be positive, and the quantity is going to be negative. Okay, so in this case, we see how the taxes make this curve downward by the distance all through this curve is going to be T. Okay, I want to make sure that. Okay, this is the new curve with the tax. So this was without the tax, and here is the supply. Okay, here is the supply, which is actually is not good represent, it's not well represented, because it's going to be P equal to QS over 2. Okay, but it's going to be naturally the same. Okay, just a way of representation. So this is the curve. Okay, so this is important beyond explanation that I said, that I know that it was kind of confusing. It was more important to have like a graph in order to understand better what we have to do now. So here it was the previous equation. So this one, this distance is the tax. Okay, so now how we are going to solve? I'm going to make equal 1 with 3. What does it mean? I'm doing 1, which is this one over here, equal to 3, which is this one. Okay, so what I'm going to find over making equal these two equations, this is going to be P2 and Q2. What is Q2? Q2 is going to be the quantities that are going to be traded after the tax, and P2 is going to be the money that is going to be received by producers. So here we have the equations again, 1, which is this one, equals to this one, which is 3. I just make this one. Okay, this one is just P. This one, this is not P square. Okay, this is just the notation of P2. Okay, this P2 that I'm going to find in. Okay, I'm going to find this P2 is this one, not pi square. So here this minus I just add to the other side, and after I finish to this one, and at the end we have this one. So this is P2. I can split 300, take care, because this is minus, so this is subtracting, so I have to divide 3 in both. Okay, so we have 100 minus T over 3. Okay, this is now the value of this one. Remember, this Q1 was equal to 200. We did it before, and this P1 is $100. So here it makes sense, because P2 is lower than 100 minus T over 3. So how we can figure out this P3? This is going to be P3, remember, is going to be this value, which is this one, plus T. If I add P2 plus t is going to be P3. So I just make plus t. So here I just make this operation. The minimum common divisor is going to be common multiple is going to be 3. It's going to be 3t minus t, which is going to be this one is P3. It makes sense because actually P3 it has to be larger than P1, which is 100. So it's going to be 100 plus 2t over 3. Okay, here we have this information. So just reviewing, so just have like fast review. Remember, we already have this P2 and we have P3. So now we can put this P2 in 3, which is 3, this one. So this is going to be the Q2, this one. Okay, so it's going to be 300 minus P. So which P I'm adding here? So this P that I'm adding here is the P2. Okay, plus T. Okay, so this Q2. So here we make again the sum of this one. So it's going to be, this is going to be 200, 300 minus 100, and this is going to be minus 2t over 3. So this, it makes sense as well. Why? Because remember Q1 it was $200, but now minus this fraction, this is going to be lower. Okay, so now we already have Q2, P2, and P3. Okay, so what happens basically, P2 is lower than P1 and P3 is higher than P1 and Q2 is lower than Q1. Next question says, tax revenue is T times Q. Use your answer to part B to solve for tax revenue as a function of T. Graph this relationship for T between 0 and 300. So here again is our case, okay, what we already did it. Okay, and here we have the prices and quantities. Now we need to put the tax revenue. This is tax revenue, okay, which is equal to Q2, which is Q2 is going to be this one, times T. And what is T? T is going to be P3 minus P2. Now we are going just to replace Q2, which is the value of Q2, this one, which is the value of P3, this one, which is the value of P2, this one. I'm just going to operate, okay? In the first one, I'm just like multiply this minus with the parentheses. We take care because this changes, minus times minus is going to be plus. This cancel out, and I have this one. This is the same denominator, so we have 2t plus t is going to be 3t. I just divided 3 over 3. Okay, I'll just simplify, and I have this one, 200 times this one is going to be t, and minus 2t over 3 times t is going to be this. So now we have the function which make a relationship between t and the t revenue. So now how we are going to operate this one? So here we have the tax revenue. Now this is relation, this is really the same as this function. What is this function about? This function is a parable. So is this a parable which has this one which is open down, or this one when it opens up. So this is considered as concave and the other is convex. So the first rule that you have to take into account, when A is lower than 0, it means that it's concave. That is the case. And remember the theory of the chapter. The theory of the chapter said that when there is a relation between the tax and the tax revenue, it has a maximum. Okay, so it doesn't matter that if you charge more tax, the government will receive more money. This is fake, it is false, because it is a concave function. It was what the guy Lefort said. If you have to find an optimal. So in this case we have A is equal minus over 2 over 3, because this one is accompanied the t square. So this is A lower than 0. So it is concave, which makes sense. So which is the vertex? So the vertex for a concave function or concave parable is going to be the maximum. You can do with derivatives with mathematics, but this is because principle of economics we are going just to use the main tools that you really need for this solution. So the vertex is going to be minus b over 2a. So remember, this is going to be the value x. Okay, so which is b? B is going to be 200. Which is going to be a? A is minus 2 over 3. So I just multiply minus times minus is going to be positive, and 3 times 200 is going to be 600 over 4 is going to be 150, which is going to be the value of this. Okay, so now we already have 150. This is the, remember, this is the tax that is going to be charged. Now we have to figure out which is the revenue. So the revenue is just going to plug this 150 in the function of the revenue of the government. So I'm going just to plug here. So I have 150 over 200 is this number, and 150 squared times 2 divided 3 is going to be this one. So this one is going to be the revenue by a tax of 150. So remember that we are going to graph this relationship for t between 0 and 300. So I'm going to replace first by 0. So instead of putting 150, I'm going to plug 0. So 200 times 0 is going to be 0 minus 0 squared times 2 is going to be 0 over 3, 0. So it's going to be 0. So naturally, if the government charges a zero tax, they will receive 0 revenue. And what about if they charge a 300? So when they charge a 300, if you replace this one, it's going to be 0 as well. So it means that the government maximum they can charge a value of 300, because otherwise they will not receive anything because it will be 0. Okay, so here we have the tax revenue, which is the y-axis, and here we have the t. Here we have the 0. Remember, a 0 tax brings 0 revenue, and a $300 tax is going to bring again 0. So this is the maximum, 150, $15,000. Okay, this is the maximum. So now we need to think about the deadweight loss tax is the area of the triangle between the supply and demand curves. Recalling that the area of a triangle is 1 over 2 times base times height. Solve for deadweight loss as a function for t. Graph this relationship for t between 0 and 300. So the same case as the previous case. So there is a hint here. So looking sideways, the base of the deadweight loss triangle is t, and the height is the difference between the quantity sold and with the tax and the quantity sold without tax. So here what I try to do, this is a representation. So this triangle is the deadweight loss. Okay, so I'm just going to be like, cannot zoom it. Sorry if I didn't put well that, but I hope this is clear. So here I just zoom it, this one, this is the deadweight loss. So this one, this is the height. So what is the height? It's going to be Q1, which is larger, minus Q2. And which is going to be the base of this triangle? The base is going to be T, which is P3 minus P2. This value we already find it, P2, P3, and Q2. So now we need to find a relationship between the tax and the deadweight loss. So here I'm going just to denote a notation of DL, which is the deadweight loss. So remember, as the problem says, the area of a triangle is base times height over 2. So now, which is going to be our case, deadweight loss. Which is the base? T. This is our base. Which is going to be the height? The difference between Q1 and Q2. So it's going to be Q1 minus Q2 over 2. So here we already know the value of Q1, which was the equilibrium, okay, in the free market. So it's going to be 200. And the Q2 is going to be this value. We already found it. So we have 200 minus 2t over 3. I just open parentheses. We take care about this minus because it changes the minus. I just cancel out. And here I just cancel 2 with 2 because remember this 2 multiplies 3 and afterward they cancel. And we have this one, dl is equal to t squared over 3. And now we have to represent this by a graph. Here we have the deadweight loss and here we have the t. So for the value of 0 is going to be 0 over 2 over 3, so it's going to be 0. And 300 is going to be 300 squared time over 3, so it's going to be 30,000. So this is going to be the value, okay? So what is interesting here, as we saw before in the theory, we are now looking this in the practice. So there is an increasing which is more than the double, because this is going to be an increasing which is higher. So just an unit of increasing in tax, it changes more the deadweight loss. Okay, so in this case we figure out here, okay, how just a little changes in taxes, it changes more in the deadweight loss. Okay, so the last question. The government now levies a tax on this good of 200 per unit. It is a good policy. Why or why not? Can you propose a better policy? So here, remember, this is the function which makes a relationship between the taxes and the tax revenue. And instead of putting t, we're going to plug 200. So instead of plugging this one, we have 200 times 200, which is this one, and 200 squared times 2 over 3 is this one, and we have this is the revenue. Remember our function. So our function was this one, okay, which is the maximum that the government can receive charging a tax is going to be 15,000. Okay, given a 150 tax. Now with the 200, what's happening here? They charge more but they receive less. So it's not really a good policy because you can receive more charging less. So what is a better policy that we can propose? So we can propose a decrease of the taxes in $50, and it will represent increasing from 13,333.33 to 15,000. Okay, I hope it has worked for you, and great success with economics, and see you the next video. Bye bye.